In any given year, up to 275 million children are exposed to some form of violence in their homes. Most of us can say we spent a lot more time at home than we could have ever anticipated over the past year because of the pandemic. I checked in with one organization that's on the front line of helping victims of abuse right here in the Valley. They tell us how even more kids can be falling victim during the pandemic.
Now that kids are virtual learning, and if you're in an environment where there's a lot of tension and stress and possibly emotional or physical abuse, that always trickles down to the kids.
We met with Becky Cecil from Crisis Services of North Alabama. They provide resources, shelters, care, and counseling for anyone in a crisis situation. And sometimes they need to help out some of the Valley's youngest who are caught in the crossfire of an abusive relationship.
It takes a toll on their mental health. So at Crisis Services, what we do is we not only help that victim of domestic violence, but if they have children, we do have someone on staff who works with that child, who does counseling with that child, because it can have long-lasting effects of being in that kind of situation and seeing that relationship going on. And what we don't want is for that cycle to be repeated.
She says the pandemic brings ideal conditions for abusers to take advantage of their victims.
It's easier to control somebody in isolation. And when you have somebody away from their friends, their family, and there's nobody to see what's going on, that gives that abuser more control.
Becky works with young people. She teaches 10th graders about respectful and safe dating practices and identifying signs of abuse. She knows the pressure students face to succeed in school in any given year, but the pandemic has just magnified that. And dealing with abuse at home can be overwhelming.
You know, as much as parents may try to hide it, there's always a trickle down. And when you're trying to learn in an environment like that, it's tough because there's all this stress. You're already stressed out about school and having to learn, and then you have this added stress. So, you know, virtual learning and being at home in a situation like that, I have to imagine for the kids, it's increasingly stressful.
To find out how to connect with Crisis Services of North Alabama, head to rocketcitynow.com. With your Mental Health Monday, I'm Sydney Stallworth, WZDX News.